Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Janai and this is Karmic Fixer Tarot, and we're continuing with our Jungian deck study. We have the Jungian Tarot by Robert Wang, and we have our two companion books that go with the deck. I think they're very helpful in understanding some of the imagery of the cards. And tonight we are working with the Chariot. Let's take a moment to take in the imagery here. And if you're brand new to tarot in general, that's always a good practice. Maybe before getting into the interpretations, trying to memorize the interpretations or learn the interpretations rather, it's always helpful to just sort of maybe take in what the card is saying to us just in the artwork alone. My initial impression of this particular card is a beautiful background that encompasses all the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. I'm not sure what that jump cut was for. I think I was editing out me opening the books and whatnot. Yeah, I'm trying to streamline these just a little bit. I hope they aren't going a little too long. And also, I just didn't quite feel like being on camera for this one. I wanted to, of course, continue with my study, but I didn't quite feel camera ready this evening. So I hope you don't mind that. And so we're looking at our chariot. And the thing that tends to be the case is that the interpretations of the cards tend to be pretty much the same across decks, but there are subtle differences. The overall interpretation of the Chariot, of course, is a representation of determination, willpower, and focused effort that brings us to victory, to a wanted outcome. And there's the association of marshaling opposing forces into one accord. If you look at the Rider-Waite-Smith Chariot, we've got the two sphinxes that are going in opposite directions. And the representation that tends to be that the charioteer is taking those energies and taking them under command and focusing them in one direction, which I think is an interesting segue into how the chariot or the charioteer in the Jungian Tarot Deck operates. We have a chariot that is not being driven at all by horses, but it's actually being driven, interestingly enough, and it might be hard to see from that distance, is that the charioteer is actually holding a crown. And in this particular tarot deck, that crown represents a supreme power that is in that crown that gives the chariot and the charioteer the authority to travel the way that it does. And just kind of looking at this card, you'll notice that there's two large wheels on the side. Now, even though the source material point out that there are four wheels, me personally, I could only see the two wheels, and then maybe the third if you count the color wheel in the front. But this chariot is not having to take two opposing forces and guide them into one direction. This particular chariot is imbued with the power to travel multi-directions, to be multi-dimensional. In fact, it can be in all directions all at once, which is represented by the archetype of, say, the all-present Father. In fact, that is the archetype that's represented in this particular chariot, or yeah, this particular chariot tarot deck, the Chariot tarot card. Sorry, I'm losing my words. Now, if you've been following this study, you'll remember that the major arcana are divided into, not necessarily divided, but the cards represent a member of an archetypal family, the mother, father, son, and daughter. And we've had other father representative cards like the Emperor as the father of fathers, I guess. The Hierophant is the father as the lawgiver, but the Chariot is the all-present Father. The Chariot represents a sort of Deus ex machina sort of energy. If you're familiar with that literary device, Deus ex machina meaning God from the machine, literally, this represents the energy of a helper from on high that can come to our particular plane of existence and intervene, give divine intervention, salvation, divine insight, wisdom at a time where it's needed. Um, Again, going back to the literary device of Deus Ex Machina, it can be unearned. It can come in the very last moment and render the plot not necessarily necessary, at least in my opinion, anyway. But yeah, the Chariot represents that type of energy. And I'm setting a timer here for about 15 minutes. I like to give myself about 15 minutes to meditate on the card. After about 5 minutes of taking in the imagery, I'll sit, maybe close my eyes, and see if I can construct an inner landscape where I'm interacting with my imagination with the images of the card. And I like to do that twice a week. And generally, I prefer to not necessarily read my companion texts before I have a chance to just get to know the card. Um, and that was the case this time. So I have some notes. I'd like to try to reduce my rambling. I appreciate it if you've been patient with my ramblings. But yeah, I do have some initial sort of notes as I was kind of getting into the card. One of the first things that I noticed, of course, is the card traveling over water. It appears to be crossing a fiery threshold, which I guess again can speak to the Chariot's ability to travel multidimensionally, um, through different terrain, through different climates, through all four of the elements without any bounds, being imbued with the power that that crown gives it. I did notice the crown. Also, one of the initial things that I noticed, which I found very interesting. And there is the, let's see, look here. Another thing, the color wheel in the front. Of course, as we've noticed, I think I started to mention this earlier, maybe. The We don't have the sphinxes or any horses pulling the chariot. We have the power of the crown, but we have also the color wheel, which represents the color wheel in this particular card represents the 12 elements of the tree of life, and that also kind of coincides with the 12 elements of the zodiac. I'm going to try not to get too into the Kabbalistic symbolism because I am untrained in Kabbalah, even though I would love to learn Kabbalah. Interestingly enough, there are a few elements of Kabbalah running throughout the Jungian Tarot Deck here. It's actually a companion book that I've been trying to get, but it seems to be out of print, and it's got it's got all of the Hermetic and Kabbalistic symbolism in depth from this deck of cards. But there I go rambling again. My apologies. Let me get back to my notes here. One thing that really stuck out to me was the chariot itself. And just looking at the way the chariot is, if you remember the Rider-Waite-Smith chariot, there's the little canopy of stars overhead. But this chariot has kind of a headrest that looks like stars. To me, it actually looked more like a keyhole in a way. And the stars behind it were the background of a realm that the chariot was moving through. Kind of like moving through a keyhole from an element of like a dark starry sky into this realm of beautiful background, daytime, encompassing a sort of daytime energy. That's again just kind of how it read to me. Let me know what you think in the comments there, how it might read to you. And I think that kind of reinforces the idea of the chariot being able to move in different dimensions and having kind of this holy supreme creator power to move. And let's see, where else is my notes taking me? Let's see. And of course, there is the snake, looping itself around the charioteer's arms. To me, it struck me immediately as a cobra with its hood raised. And there is some information in the text about the representation of the serpent here. The serpent tends to represent a sort of spiritual energy. Um, it harkens to, I guess, a kind of Kundalini energy and just sort of serpent power. Um, and if you think of, connotations of serpents or whatnot, I won't necessarily get very deep into that. But I guess just observe the card however you will, how it strikes you. And, everything that I'm saying here is just kind of some background information about what the images could represent. But as you're observing the card, you might not necessarily even want to take in everything I'm saying about each of the different images. One thing that might be helpful is, of course, just kind of there's the base understanding of the interpretation of the cards, but there's also leaning into your own intuition as to how the cards strike you. And one thing I will do though is I will kind of read from the guidebook, just kind of give a little more information um, about what this card symbolizes according to the guidebook that comes with the deck. I mentioned that this card represents the archetype of the all present Father, but it also represents the archetype of the spirit below. In some ways, can maybe be interpreted as sort of a Holy Spirit, just kind of the impartation of creator power and creator might and the energy of that into this plane of existence. You think of, if you're familiar with Judeo Christian um, tradition, history, you might understand the Holy Spirit as kind of an inner witness or God's holy fire um, passed down or left here on earth for us to, you know, for us to work with, move through, have that power intervene in our lives and whatnot. I think I'm getting a little off subject here, but again, um, there's the representation of the archetype of the spirit below. And this particular chariot, um, another way that it's different from the Rider Waite Smith chariot is that the Rider Waite Smith chariot tends to be associated with the zodiac sign of Cancer, a cardinal water energy. It's emotion, relationships, love, intuition. But in this particular deck, the planetary association is with the planet Mercury. And Mercury tends to represent communication, transmission of news, letters, representing short term travel, contracts. There's a sort of brilliance and a facility that is associated with the planet Mercury. And I guess you could see this card encompassing, that communicative energy, that clarity, just kind of this sort of inner knowing, this sort of kind of holy knowing that's been imparted onto us. And I guess there is the association of Mercury with that knowing. And let's see. Let's see, what else can I say about the Chariot? I always found it interesting about this particular card. I don't know if I touched on this already, but how the Chariot cards are named for the chariot, for the machine itself, not the charioteer, not the chariot driver. So that always keeps me in mind that the central character of this card is the chariot, of is the conveyance of this power, the conveyance of this wisdom, this sort of divine energy, this divine power. I don't know if I mentioned this already. I've done a few different takes of this particular voiceover, but let's see. The Chariot, let's see, we did mention the kind of all-present father, the archetype of the spirit below. I've just lost the thought. There's something else that I wanted to touch on with this particular card. Hopefully it'll come back to me. I'd hate to have to edit this voiceover again. But yeah, I think the main thing is just kind of allowing this card to speak to you, allowing your intuition to flow freely as you're looking at this card here. Let's see. I literally had a thought and I lost it. I think I need to make more concrete notes here. Oh, yes, yes. I don't know if I mentioned how the charioteer is representative of a helper of mankind. I guess that comes through with the idea of the Deus ex machina, but this card represents kind of a guardian angel figure, and just kind of a reminder of help from on high. Um, let's see, kind of an omnipresence, kind of an inescapable sort of omnipresence that's represented in this card as the chariot takes on, again, the all present father archetype in the archetypal family of the major arcana cards in this particular deck. Let's see. We have a few more moments. And of course, if my voiceover is distracting, I hope at this point you've gone ahead and muted it if you just kind of want to sit with the card. Let's see. I think we mentioned the crown, imbuing the chariot, and the charioteer with a sort of supreme motive power that can control its movements, that can allow it to, again, traverse the different terrain, the different planes of existence, the different planes of consciousness. And let's see, what else do we have here? Again, just kind of scanning my notes. And I guess kind of in keeping with the standard interpretation of the Chariot card, we have the fire that represents kind of a spiritual fire, that's sort of an initiatory sort of power that's kind of pulling the chariot along. So the chariot is not being driven by the sphinxes or horses, as might be the representation in other tarot decks, but it's this fire that's kind of pulling it toward, where it needs to go. And it's really interesting how it seems like there's an interplay between the chariot and the fire. The chariot doesn't necessarily need to be controlled by the fire. The fire doesn't necessarily need to be controlled by the chariot. Um, it's really kind of just kind of looking at this card. It did kind of make me wonder. There is the fact that the fire is very initiatory, but is the fire a part of the power that's represented, kind of the creator motive power that's represented by the crown? Again, I might kind of just be rambling. Yeah, this is kind of turning into a ramble. So I don't think there's too much longer left. But yeah, you can take a look at the card. I think in the next few moments, I can't think of anything else to add about this particular card based on the companion texts of this deck and the guidebook of this deck, and just also my own intuition in observing the deck. So I think these next few moments we can just kind of take in the image of the card. I think one thing I might do is try expanding or enlarging the card for our next study. And if you've made it to this part, thank you so much for joining me for this particular study. I found this card very fascinating. Just kind of meditating with the cards. Each encounter is different from the previous one. I've been getting into just meditation in general, and these images have been really helpful in not only getting me into the practice of meditation, but also helping me to understand this particular deck better. I've probably mentioned it in other videos in this series, but this was actually my first tarot deck. And it struck me because of the Jungian angle, and I was really fascinated by Jungian psychology. And that's kind of the thing that actually further opened me up to tarot. So this is a beautiful deck, but I did find it a little bit confounding as a new tarot reader. So I did wind up getting the Rider-Waite deck. Oh, I think that's the end of our meditation there. But yeah, I hope you're getting something out of this deck study. Maybe it's inspiring you to study your own tarot deck or this particular tarot deck. And thank you, as always, for joining me and for taking a look at the Chariot with me this evening. And until next time, I hope to see you again with Karmic Fixer Tarot and our Jungian deck study. Thank you so much for watching. And if this is your sort of thing, please feel free to give a like, and I will see you next time.